What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here with a new daily video. All of the stories therein are new to this channel as well as I can keep track of. So if you guys end up enjoying this video and you guys are enjoying these daily videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. It really helps the video to do well and ensures I can keep making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts you'd like to share in the comments, either about the stories or the video itself, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I may not always be able to respond to them. Either way, I'm gonna let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I'll see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Once, when my cousin and I were in our younger teens, we would get bored and would wander around our neighborhood looking for things to do. This one particular night, though, we came across this house that was not very well taken care of and seemed to be completely empty. Years before, the people that lived there were very active, growing gardens and raising animals on the property. But for a while now, it sat completely empty and abandoned looking. There were never any cars or any people around the property at all. Because of this, that night we decided to go check it out a bit further. We started by jumping the fence and wandering around the yard looking for any valuables left behind. Honestly, it looked like a junkyard to us. We wandered over to this empty camper and walked inside. We looked in through the cupboards, peeked through the doors, and checked under the cushions, but we couldn't find anything interesting. Suddenly, we heard a small thump behind a garbage can. We were shaking and didn't dare to check what it was in that moment. Out of nowhere, a black cat jumped up and out of the camper. We screamed like little girls. We decided to move on from that camper and go check the main house instead. It was for sure abandoned. We hadn't seen anyone there in months, if not years, and we checked often. We tried the front door, but it was completely locked and boarded shut, so we moved around to the side and tried the windows as well. They too were locked. Next, we tried the back sliding door, and to our surprise, it actually opened. Only a few inches though. There was a stick on the other side wedged between the wall and the door, so we had to reach in to try and move it out of the way. My cousin was already shaking and just wanted to go home. We'd gotten so far already though, why not have a simple peek? I wedged my head and arm inside and reached in for the stick. I just barely couldn't grab a hold of it. I pushed harder and further, trying to reach. Just then, I heard a deathly scream, louder and more high-pitched than anything I'd ever heard. I heard a thumping rushing down the stairs. There was an old lady, not walking, not running, but charging at me. She'd come out of literally nowhere and with no warning at all. I tried to pull myself out, but I was completely stuck. My cousin abandoned me. He was already scared enough. I pulled with everything I had in me, scarring up my arm and almost ripping off my ear trying to get out. Just as I pulled myself out of the door, the old lady slammed face first into the glass door, banging her hands and head on it. She was screaming and yelling at me, words I could not understand. I ran half shaking and half numb. I'd never felt so lightheaded and numb in my life. My cousin and I asked around the neighborhood the next day, and we found from some old people living there that there seemed to be some crazy old woman living in the home that thought the world was soon ending. Because of this, she never came outside. She hoarded food and never left the house, living in fear of other people. She had no vehicles and lived alone as well. It appeared she had some sort of severe mental problem. The next day, when I was walking the neighborhood, I spotted a vehicle at her home and a man in her yard. I stopped and watched as the man pulled out 2 bulldogs. I assumed she called someone because she thought we were trying to rob her. Honestly, I felt really bad about everything that went down. That was the day I learned that no matter how tempting it may be, or how interesting something looks, if it's not yours, then it's best to stay away. This story is about a bad experience I had when I went camping on the beach in the summer with my boyfriend. We had the nice idea of camping out on the beach instead of staying at a hotel, since I'd always wanted to sleep and hear the waves hitting the shore, see the night sky whenever I wanted, and just have this experience at least once in my life. We were supposed to stay in that tent for about a week. The area had a public restroom with some showers and some restaurants nearby as well, so the matter of hygiene and hunger were not that much of an issue. We bought all the supplies we needed for such an adventure as well. A 2-person tent which was blacked out, so the sun's rays couldn't come in, an inflatable mattress, first aid, lanterns, etc. The first nights were no issue. We actually enjoyed every moment of it. We would take all of our valuables with us in backpacks though, in case anything bad happened to our tents while we were gone. You know, phones, chargers, wallets. We weren't the only people with that idea, so there were other people camped in the area. There were plenty of people, either single, couples, or even families, and that included people that were behaving badly. When the night arrived, you would hear people laughing, partying, and dancing occasionally. Probably smoking weed, taking drugs, or drinking a lot of alcohol. We didn't really mind though. Nobody had bothered anyone for the past 4 days and nights. People were there having a lot of fun, as they knew best that no one was going to be aggressive. One night, we stayed out later than we usually did, around 1 a.m., just wandering around the lively streets to listen to the street performers, eating out and doing other such activities. That was when we stopped at one such street performer's corner, who seemed to have quite a lot of people circling around him and listening to his music. We realized soon, though, that he was not the main character people were gathered here for. Right in the middle of that crowded street, where cars were passing by often, was a middle-aged woman, dancing completely in the nude, clearly being affected by some kind of drug or alcohol abuse. She was completely incoherent. She would randomly expose herself to people while dancing to the music, despite the disgust of everyone around. We didn't look that much into it. We weren't really interested. We decided to go back to our tent and have a drink in silence, while watching the stars and falling asleep to the sounds of the ocean. While drinking by ourselves, though, we could hear some woman shouting in the distance. We soon realized it was the same woman we had seen before. It seemed she wasn't alone. She had some friends with her, 2 other women. They had set up camp on the beach just ahead of us, a few tents further down. It was close enough that we could still hear and see them, even if it was dark. They lit a fire on the beach and continued to wildly drink and dance around randomly. Of course, she was still naked, but this time she was wearing a see-through skirt. She even went and dipped in the ocean for what seemed to be an eternity. I just remember thinking to myself, how can she not be cold? It must be freezing out here. My boyfriend just shrugged and told me not to pay attention to this girl. If we didn't engage with them, they wouldn't engage with us either. I did as I was told, but even so, I could feel their eyes watching us. Putting those thoughts aside though, we decided to head to sleep early. It was a beautiful night and the air was warm. We decided not to close the tent completely, just zipping the mosquito cover so the air would still circulate inside and the sun would shine in the morning to wake us up early. I don't recall how long I'd been sleeping for exactly, but I remember suddenly being woken in the middle of the night by steps circling our tent and a woman's voice humming a song softly. The tent was not very thick, and you could hear everything outside of it. I was too afraid to look out. I was too afraid to even change my position, as I didn't want to indicate to whoever was outside that I'd just noticed their presence. All I could do was lay down and look out through the mosquito cover. All of a sudden, though, I heard the footsteps stop just above where my head was, and a voice whispering through the walls of the tent. "Don't be afraid. I'm just going to sing you a lullaby." The footsteps began to rapidly circle the tent. I could see feet in front just passing by, noticing the very familiar long see-through skirt billowing behind her. I stayed awake in terror, and the next morning we packed our tent in a hurry and moved to a different area, as far away as possible from that woman and her friends. This is more of a warning to people who live alone than anything else, but the memory of it still creeps the ever-loving shit out of me. A few years back, I lived in an apartment complex. It was not in a particularly bad part of town either. In fact, I'd lucked out even, somehow managing to move into the same building as a handful of friends of mine. I thought this was perfect. A couple of months after living there, though, I started to notice some things going missing. It was never anything big like my laptop or my Xbox or my TV. It would be smaller things. An iPod, a disposable camera, a couple of other small things just vanishing here and there. I'd often knew I'd left them out in the open on the counter or something, but then they'd just be gone. I figured I'd just misplaced them, because again, they were fairly small items. A few times I'd get ready to leave, only to find my bottom lock already locked. Now, personally, I don't put much stock in doorknob locks. They're fairly flimsy and easy to pick anyway, and not really worth the effort. I only really ever use deadbolts and the like. When people would come over, I'd close the door behind them and lock the deadbolt, of course. That was a reflex, even when I was home alone. That part of the door would be locked, but I'd never lock the knob itself. I just felt safer that way. The deadbolt had no keyhole on the other side of the door for someone to pick or anything like that, after all. 3 times I noticed the doorknob was locked when I went to leave the house, even though I myself never used it. I rationalized that perhaps when going to lock the deadbolt, I just locked that too out of instinct. I mean, what else could it be? Well, one day, after living there for about 7 months now, I'm just sitting there in my living room when I hear some shuffling by my front door. Since my apartment was a 1-bedroom and fairly small, I could easily hear this through the walls. I got up and moved a bit closer, standing maybe 4 feet away from the door. My heart immediately sank as I watched the doorknob begin to twist ever so slowly. It turned and turned, and then the door pushed in, only to be stopped in place by my deadbolt. At an agonizingly slow pace, the person on the other side of the door pulled it closed. They clicked it softly shut, and I watched and listened as they slid a key into my lock and locked the doorknob themselves. I didn't know what to do. Have you ever seen something that just restarts your brain? It's so unfathomable that you just can't take in any more information in the moment. That's exactly what this was. I wish I could say I snuck up to the door and banged against it, scaring the shit out of whoever was on the other side. But of course, that's not what happened. I didn't do anything because my brain couldn't actually comprehend that someone with a key was trying to get into my apartment while I was still home. The only thing that had saved me in that moment was my deadbolt. And before anyone suggests it was one of my aforementioned friends or my husband with a spare key or something, no. I had the only 2 copies of my key because my husband was deployed at the time. Not even my family had a spare. Everything sort of snapped into place after that. Someone had been sneaking into my apartment, stealing my shit and doing God knows what while I was gone, then locking the door behind them. They'd attempted to do this while I was there, too, locking my doorknob. How many times had they been in my apartment when I wasn't home? There was no way for me to know, because like I said before, I can't lock the deadbolt from outside. Logically, I knew it had to be someone who worked in the office, a maintenance man most likely, but since I hadn't looked through the peephole in that moment, I couldn't figure out which of the 4 guys who worked there it was. Crazily enough, about 6 months after finally moving out, a friend who still lived there told me that all of the maintenance men had been fired because all of them were reported for creeping around apartments and suspected of stealing as well. While this might not be outright terrifying like some stories, it's still pretty scary. Another reminder to always lock your doors in multiple ways, even when you're already home. I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little bit about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined, and I think that may have saved me this time. I was using dating apps a few years ago. Met this guy, he seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would get most of my target stuff. I used to be in a women's league for competition shooting. I had seen this guy around before because of this, and had a fairly decent impression of him. I still wanted to be safe though. He invited me out to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert I really wanted to go to, and I figured it would be safe as well. It was at a well-known place with a lot of security. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars, and wanted to show me his Mustang. He liked to brag about how well he kept it running and how much he babied it. I was into time trial racing at the moment, so I was interested to see what he had done on it. He picked me up and we started heading to the event. Right before the exit, he said his car was suddenly acting funny. I was watching the dash though. If you've been in racing, you know our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside the car. As I looked though, I noticed there was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems at all. I thought that was fairly weird. All I said was that we should try and limp it on over to the concert venue. It was less than a mile away now, and it was better than being stuck on the I-15. He agreed and drove us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert, and things were okay-ish. He kept on watching me and buying me drinks the whole time. I refused to drink though. Every time he gave one to me, I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling the alcohol, and I was getting super weirded out. The concert ended and it was finally time to leave. For context, this particular event happened at the local reservation town site. At the time, the res did not have great self-service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come get me. I decided to bite the bullet, and I talked him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds a bit silly, but when you take that old highway, even though it's slower, people seem more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured if he really was having car troubles, it would be a lot safer. Plus, we wouldn't have people flying around us at 80 miles per hour. We made it about halfway between the town site and our town, when he said the car was acting funny again and pulled over. I was stone cold sober still though, and didn't notice anything wrong. When I got out of the car to check it out with him, he started making comments about how I was so drunk and I should just wait inside. He even explicitly said, "It's safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you." This dude had no idea that I was actually native myself. I just happened to be kind of pale. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, so I checked my phone. Just barely got a bit of service. I started to text my dad. As I was walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed that instead of looking at the car, he was now watching me. I started acting like I was trying to get cell service to get help. Out of the very corner of my eye, I saw this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order your cylinders fire in, so doing this will either make the car run terribly or not even be able to turn on at all. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he was doing, and my dad told me to start walking. As I started to walk away, the man hopped back into the car and opened his glove box, which exposed the pistol lying within. He told me not to worry and said we would be perfectly safe. I broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He said to start walking and to tell the guy that he was already on his way and that our friends lived just up the road. So that's exactly what I did. I started walking with a purpose and took off as quickly as I could. The man was yelling and starting to chase after me, but I yelled back that the wind was too loud and I couldn't hear him. I said I'd be back with our friends in a moment. I was scared out of my mind though. We were 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually led to a cemetery, so no one was around to help me. I got a really bad feeling the farther I got from the car. I turned around and looked. The hood was now closed and the lights were on. I decided to hide in the farm irrigation next to the road. I kept walking towards town crouched down and texted my dad what was happening. I heard a car slowly come up behind me. Then I saw a flashlight. I pressed against the side of the ditch and waited for the lights to pass by. Once I couldn't hear anything else, I crawled out and kept walking amongst the weeds. My dad texted me that he saw me, so when he pulled up, I ran to his truck. As we made our way back towards town, we passed by that dude, and he was now surrounded by 3 cop cars. My dad told me not to worry much about what happened. I heard through the grapevine later he had been charged with violent crimes in the past, and he had been arrested that night for concealed carrying without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town ever since. If I didn't have experience with cars and didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have places where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses. I highly recommend everyone take them and at least know the basics. This dude knew I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me so piss-ass drunk I wouldn't realize what was happening. Luckily, his fake car troubles didn't fool me. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio just a few weeks ago. There was a place I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I had never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect. I did know it was pretty deep in the woods though. We took a trip from our rented cabin, using Google GPS to get to the location. We started driving, and it was, for lack of a better word, a real impoverished area. It had a very Hills Have Eyes-esque ambiance. We literally only saw like 2 cars on the way there, and on the back roads as well. We got to a point where we needed to enter the forest, and were close by to the tunnel. There was a sign that said we were entering Bubblewood. For a little more additional information, I drive a Mercedes that I'm lucky to have, and my husband was in the car. He's a black man with dreadlocks, and I had my 10-year-old nonverbal autistic son with me as well, and my 6-year-old daughter too. We drove down this real creepy stone road into the forest. There was nothing back there. No cars, no houses, not a single person. We did see signs we were close though, and pulled into the parking lot. There was a footbridge that people had built there. We walked over the footbridge and made our way toward the tunnel, which was a lot larger than I'd expected. All of a sudden, we heard this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel, into the woods away from the parking lot. A truck came driving towards us while we were on foot. The truck stopped in the middle of the tunnel. The person got out of their truck with a chainsaw. I could see it was a white guy in his 60s. He started to walk after my family, following us everywhere we went through the tunnel. I tried to call out to him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources or something, but he wouldn't say a single word. As we turned around to leave, he started to rev up his chainsaw behind us. The sound echoed throughout the tunnel. At this point, we had no cell phone service, and literally no one knew my family was out there except for us. I was already worried my car might be sending the wrong idea to people, like we were some naive folks with money or something. We didn't have much. We rushed back to the car to get the kids in their booster seats. This motherfucker jumped back into his car and drove over the footbridge in his truck towards us, following us to the parking lot. Honestly, I don't even know how his truck fit onto that bridge. He stopped again and got out of his truck. About this point, I noticed there were some dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were his. We compared his hand and my son's, and they were not a match. I don't know who would have been touching the car, because we were watching the chainsaw man the entire time we were there. Needless to say, we got out of there as fast as possible. Just a few minutes later, though, I looked back into my rear view mirror, only to see a bunch of dust kicking up behind us. There he is. He had driven pretty fast on the stone road to catch up to us. There was nowhere to go in these woods. The road was basically one lane, and we still had no GPS. Every time I thought we would lose him, he would turn up behind us once again. I was just waiting for my tires to pop on a trap or something, or for this guy to speed up and ram me off the road into a ravine. Finally, we emerged from the woods. I turned around, only to see he was still following us. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in all the excitement. Surprisingly, the guy on the truck did not follow us. I turned around to go back past the stone road that went into the forest and take a different way. There was one lone house near this road, and to my surprise, I saw his truck parked right there. He had to have seen us drive into the road in the woods and taken some way back to the tunnel. I don't know if he was trying to protect the site from some graffiti or what, but that was really scary. It was like every scary movie trope rolled into one single event. I work at a retail store and I detest my job with all my heart. Because I was a dumb shit and said I was always available though, they'd routinely fuck me over and put me on nights. I whine and bitch and moan and digress. I'm okay working nights since I get to see my boyfriend when he picks me up at least. Boyfriend usually gets off at 10:30, but he doesn't leave until 11. Most nights I'd have to wait for him to arrive. On top of that, he had to make a 10-minute drive as well, so I'd have to wait around an hour and 40 to 45 minutes. That didn't really bother me that much though. He'd call to tell me he was coming and make sure I was still alive at least. Earlier in the week, an Uber driver had kept on asking me if I was someone named Lenore. I told him no, and he did it again, but this time kept asking if I was sure. How the fuck am I not gonna be sure of my name? Fortunately, at that moment, my boyfriend pulled in and honked at me, causing this Uber creep to speed away. I'm a paranoid penny, so this made me wonder if he'd been watching me or something, and knew my boyfriend always came late. Then I tweaked out, since I'd kept on getting these weird phone calls from a telemarketing agency or something. Whenever I'd answer though, no one was there, and they'd hang up immediately. Was this connected? Was the government watching me? Did I only have 7 days left to live? Well, fast forward 3 days later, and I'm just standing there listening to some music, waiting for him to pick me up and call me. He finally did and started cracking a joke about how he was glad the creepy Uber driver didn't answer. As we started chatting the shit with each other and joking around, suddenly this Indian woman walked up to me. I didn't hear what she was saying at first, since I had noise-canceling headphones. I could tell she was getting closer and closer though, and kept on calling out to me. Finally, her hey reached my ears. I looked over to her, smiled, and went back to talking to my boyfriend. She did it again though, so I excused myself. Yes, may I help you? Do you need a ride? She asked. She looked nice enough, but something was off about her. Her car was parked at the stop sign, and I could see there was someone else in it. No, my friend is coming to pick me up right now, actually. Thank you. I noticed there was a man in the driver's seat, and she wasn't wearing a uniform from either of the stores near us. She started to ask me again. Are you sure? I can give you a ride. Do you need a ride? Get in, come on, you need a ride, right? I was beginning to feel a little uncomfortable. My preschool don't get in a stranger's car training kicked in, so I politely declined again and went back to talking to my boyfriend. Hey, are you close? I just pulled out. I'll get there. Just stay on the line. That woman's gone now, right? No, she was not gone. In fact, she was standing 6 feet away glaring at me. She looked very annoyed. I told him in code that no, she had not left. She had in fact remained there leaning on the car watching me. She was looking angrier with each passing second as well. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the man tell her something. She looked at me and began to interrogate me. Your friend's not here. You need a ride? Where's your friend? He probably forgot about you. That's okay, we'll take you where you need to go. It's cold, come on, tell us where you live, we'll drop you off. At this point, she got closer to me. I tried to avoid her by moving to the farther end of the plaza strip. Honey? Yeah, so about my sister? She's gotten closer, but I'm pretty scared she's too far away from home. Something might happen. Hurry so I can tell you. I said a code as the car drove up next to me. Now she looked extremely pissed. Get in the car now. At this point, she opened the car and began trying to push me inside, pulling me, yanking on my jacket. She was a taller and bigger woman than me, so she even tried to pick me up. At this point, I'm pretty sure my bowels threatened to release. I was screaming and kicking and wiggling. Meanwhile, I could hear through the phone him yelling that he was on his way and he was calling the police. Now my mind was running 1,000 miles an hour. I was panicking, thinking I was going to be raped or presented as some weird present for her husband. He looked very content with her efforts to kidnap me. Get in! Shut up! I will hit you! I started crying as she managed to push my torso into the car. My right hand was locked to my phone. She began trying to pull it out of my hand. My boyfriend was panicking, telling me the police were sending an officer right now. She shoved my face into the leather seat. My airway was obstructed, and she was not letting me go. She was bigger than me, stronger than me, and she knew it. Her whole weight was pressing onto me. I tried not to panic so I didn't black out from lack of oxygen. All of a sudden, I started getting mad as shit. Her husband said something in Punjabi. She lifted one hand up and leaned down, trying to get something out of the front. Immediately, I used the arms I'd been using to push myself off the seat to jab her in the stomach. She recoiled, letting go of me a little. I headbutted her, tossing my melon back as I screamed, fear-stricken and adrenaline-hazed. Finally, my boyfriend pulled in. I bolted to his car as the Indian woman was sitting stunned on the ground. After I shut the door, he sped off towards his house. When we got inside, I broke down, babbling about how scared and terrifying it all was, and how if I hadn't had that opportunity, she might have taken me to her house and done God knows what. After this incident, the police officer they dispatched got there 20 minutes later, and of course didn't find anyone. My boyfriend talked to his boss and was granted the ability to leave early to come get me. I'm still weirded out by cars stalling in the plaza. This happened about 3 weeks ago. I'm generally a slightly paranoid person as it stands already, and I've listened to many of these types of stories. I'm a small woman in her early 20s who lives alone in a smallish condo/apartment with her cat. It's on the second floor of the building, where I moved in a few months ago. There are 2 doors one must enter to get inside my apartment. First is outside leading into the building, and second is obviously my apartment door itself. Tenants have keys for the first outside door, which only has one lock, whereas the actual apartment doors have both locks and deadbolts. Otherwise, a visitor has to be buzzed in to be allowed inside. For some clarity, there are 8 apartments per building in my complex, with an outside door on either side of the building. Mine is closer to the back, and is situated directly above a currently empty space. My downstairs neighbor to the left is around my age, and the only neighbor I'm actually close with. She's often away though, staying with her boyfriend. This means that while I technically live near others, my home is very isolated. There is an outdoor light situated next to the door, but I'd noticed when returning home that the bulb had either broken or burned out, and hadn't thought to contact maintenance to fix it. It was already pretty late at night, and I was tired anyway. There hadn't appeared to be many others home in my building, as the parking lot on my side wasn't particularly full. I was taking care of a few chores around the house at around 10 p.m. It was Friday night, so I was running the dishwasher and folding up laundry. I'd had a pretty long week at school, and arrived home probably an hour to an hour and a half before. My cat was kind of keeping me company as I puttered along. It was hard to hear much outside when the dishwasher was going, and I was already distracted. But I did notice a sort of soft rustling sound coming from outside. It didn't sound too strange aside from being fairly repetitive. I didn't really know what it was at this point, but being constantly anxious, I was too frightened of the dark to look outside the window to that side of the building. This might very well have been totally unrelated, but I still think it bears mentioning. Fast forward a bit. I was standing at my kitchen counter working on a report on my laptop. Over the sound of the dishwasher, though, I heard a soft knock on my door. I was unsure at first if I'd even actually heard anything. I went still and waited for a moment. There it was again, quiet but a little longer and faster. This made me pretty uneasy. It was late at night. My first thought was that it might be one of my neighbors. I approached the door silently and looked out the peephole. As I mentioned, the only neighbor I know well is the young woman who lives downstairs, but I am familiar with what all the others look like. The man standing outside was completely unfamiliar to me. Tall, wearing either a dark blue or black jacket, Caucasian, and with very dark hair. I had no idea who this guy was. What was very unusual was just how close he was standing to the door, even distorted through the peephole. He was so close I would guess him to be standing right up against it, leaning his face in and staring through the peephole. There was an odd sort of energy in his stance, if that makes any sense. I felt extremely unnerved. I was glad I'd made very little noise when walking over. I backed up about 3 feet from the door and waited. I'm not totally sure how much time passed, but he stood there a couple of minutes even longer than that before I heard him go downstairs and through the outside door. Now, I've had a neighbor from downstairs knock on my door in the evening before to ask if I was experiencing a power outage like him. He'd brought his wife with him, probably to reassure me, and had stood a reasonable distance from the door after knocking firmly. That's exactly what this strange guy didn't do. I know I'm paranoid though, so I try to convince myself I was making a big deal of nothing. I told myself this was probably just a similar situation. I was far too immediately uncomfortable though to consider answering the door. I decided to listen to my gut instead. I texted both my mom and my male friend about the situation. My friend offered to come keep me company, but by that time I had talked myself out of my nervousness and assured him I was fine. I went to sleep about an hour later and woke up having almost completely forgotten about it. Shit got weird the next day though. Only in the context of what I saw next morning did that knock begin to seem frightening. I had agreed to accompany my mom and her boyfriend to a yard sale that morning in some nearby neighborhoods. They were picking me up early, around 7:30. My mom gave me a call from her car when they arrived on my side of the building to let me know to come down. I grabbed my bag, went out my door and downstairs, but as soon as I opened the outside door, something was very clearly wrong. The handle turned very loosely in my hand, and the door popped open very easily. Upon shutting it again behind me, the handle itself completely fell out of the hole. Looking back, I wish I'd taken a picture of it, because it's a little bit hard to describe. It had obviously been tampered with. The outside portion of the door handle held in place with screws was now completely missing. The lock component of the handle was missing too. Essentially, all that was left behind was a stripped handle with a hole in the middle where the keyhole should be. My mom, having heard about the knocking incident from me the night before, was not cool with this all and insisted I report this. I contacted maintenance and the police, but there are no cameras situated near my apartment, and definitely not near my door. I've gotten no additional information as of now. In talking with my neighbors, who were obviously made aware of the vandalism as well, nobody who was at home or awake around that time heard anyone knock on their door, or heard, came in contact with, or saw the man I described. Maybe I'm overthinking a bit, but this does make me nervous. It makes the approach seem much more targeted and less random, as if the person knew I'd be there alone. For what it's worth, at least the outside door handle was replaced very quickly that afternoon, and nothing like that has happened ever since. This is definitely a childhood memory of mine that I will never forget. I'm female and 22, by the way. Growing up, my aunt and uncle owned a beach condo. My favorite way to spend the summer was to stay there with my family, specifically my cousin Charlie. We were absolutely inseparable growing up. There was a 1-year difference between us. The beach we stayed at was a very popular tourist beach on the SC coast. So, in the summer, it was incredibly busy. I mean, barely any room between you and the family next to you. Now, my family would spend all day on that beach, from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. The beach would stay crowded until about 5, when everyone would go back to their rooms to shower and go out to eat. This meant from around 5 to 7 every day. That was my favorite time to be outside. We would have all the room to run wild, build sandcastles, dig huge holes. We wouldn't have to worry about people knocking them down or being too close. Around 5:30 p.m. one day, my family decided they wanted to walk to the pier about 2 miles away. Charlie and I, though, begged to stay behind so we could build sandcastles together. We were 9 and 10 at the time, so they said we could stay as long as we didn't get in the water or leave our spot. The condo we stayed at was 1 row back, and we were not allowed to cross the street without adults. We agreed to their terms and continued to build a row of sandcastles as they walked off into the distance. Around 5 minutes later, though, this extremely tall man wearing this floppy beach hat, sunglasses, and with a dollop of sunscreen on his nose came running straight up to us. He started by commenting how beautiful our sandcastles were, asking how long it took us to build them that high. He also asked if it was just the two of us working on them. We were both extremely introverted kids. We thanked him and kept our answers short, and tried to ignore him as he stood there watching us. All of a sudden he got real quiet and started to glance around at the mostly empty beach. Then he said he had to go meet a friend of his. He told us to stay right there so he could bring his friend back to look at how great our sandcastles were. Then he jogged away from us. When he'd gotten a safe distance, Charlie and I both looked at each other and said, "We've gotta get out of here." Side note, hell yeah at us for being smart kids. We immediately started weighing our options. We knew our family wouldn't be back for at least another 30 minutes. We also knew we weren't allowed to cross the street, and quite frankly, we were scared to. About 100 yards away, though, was a tiny ramp overlooking the ocean. I believe it was a handicap access to the beach, as well as just a place to sit down, I guess. We grabbed our big shovels and decided to hollow out underneath that thing enough to where we could crawl under and not be seen. It didn't take us very long, since the high tide over the years had taken out a good 3 feet of sand underneath. Our adrenaline was rushing mad fast, too. We took our shovels inside with us and crawled underneath. The man was still yet to be seen. I assume it took us all of 8 minutes to climb under the pier and bury it again. Our heads were partially visible above the sand horizon, and we started freaking out, thinking he would surely be able to spot us if he just looked hard enough. There were 2 boogie boards lying about 50 feet away, though. It looked like some kids had abandoned them there. We grabbed them and propped them up against the ramp, covering our crawl space and the top of our heads from sight. Charlie curled up in a ball and cried, while running scenarios by me that we were definitely going to get taken. I tried my best to calm him down and say everything was going to be okay. Our parents would be back soon enough. I definitely felt like crying myself, though. The whole thing was so weird. I knew that since we both had such a bad feeling about the situation, especially at such a young age, this man was definitely having sinister intentions. Charles and I tried to peek out of the tiny slits where the boogie boards curved, and eventually saw the man walking back. He didn't have anyone with him, which we definitely thought he would since he said he was going to bring friends. As we observed, we noticed the man had seen we were gone. He turned around several times, checking to see if we were in the ocean or by the dunes. Once he realized and didn't seem to notice us that we were gone, he got extremely angry. He started huffing, puffing, stomping around. He looked over to our sandcastles and kicked them all down. We'd built a ton over the course of the day and basically had a gigantic wall of them. He made sure to kick every single one down before storming away. We stayed under that ramp thing for 45 more minutes until our family got back. We were way too scared to come out, especially after seeing the man's irrational reaction. We cried and told our family what had happened, and of course, they didn't believe us. We still talk about it sometimes at family gatherings or holidays. Both of us still remember it like it was yesterday. So I can't entirely say I know what's happening here, as to this day I still have no clue who did and is doing this to me. This all started when I was in 8th grade, the very first time it happened. This was a good 6 or 7 years ago, mind you. I live in a sweet southern suburb outside Austin, Texas with my family. Being as I'm the oldest of the 4 of us, I was always home alone because my siblings had parks and rec, sports, things like that, and I didn't really do any extracurriculars. It was a weeknight and my family were all at my sister's gymnastics tournament. I had been supposed to go as well, as all of the members of the family had to attend all our siblings' stuff, but I was sick. I've always been a fairly cautious creature, one who makes sure the doors are locked when I'm alone. Because of my lifelong love of anything and everything scary, naturally I had watched more than a few episodes of Criminal Minds and the like before heading to the 3rd floor, where my parents' room is, to take a bath in their fancy tub. It was about 8:30. It was in the winter as well, so it had long since gotten dark outside. About 20 minutes into my bath, though, I started to hear footsteps, loud ones like big work boots, walking up the steps. My dad, being a construction worker, did wear some big boots, so I thought it might have been him. I called out though and heard nothing in response. The steps kept on going though, before reaching the top. Then all the sounds stopped and I didn't hear anything else. I turned the water off and listened for a while, but there was still nothing. I turned the water back on and went back to reading my book in the tub. The next night, one of my sisters had their final game. This game was a very late one in a town about 25 miles away, so again, my family went together after making me dinner. I almost decided to go since I was feeling a little bit better, but I didn't because my mom didn't want to risk getting people outside the family sick. I really wish I had gone with them though. Like usual, I locked up the side door and ate some ice cream while watching a bunch of scary shows. I then headed up to my parents' room to take another fancy bath and read more of my book. This time it was a bit later though, almost around 10 or so. I was taking a very long bath and had already forgotten about the night before, until that sound happened again. I heard those same footsteps creeping up the stairs. Mind you, our stairs are hardwood, not carpet, so you could hear when someone was stepping on them quite clearly. The house was dead silent too, except the sound of the TV, which I had left turned on in the room outside the bathroom. I automatically turned the water off again and felt my heart almost stop beating. I was so scared. The footsteps this time seemed quite hurried, like the person was skipping up the steps in a rush. Once again, they stopped when they reached the top. I waited for almost 5 minutes, and nothing. I turned the water back on and picked up my old track phone and dialed my mom's number. She picked up and I started talking right away, asking if it was her. She didn't reply, but I could hear someone on the other end breathing. I started to get a bit mad. Why was she messing with me like this and not replying? All of a sudden though, a deep voice called back through the phone, which made me almost drop it in the tub. It snapped at me. "I am not your mom." Then they hung up. As if instantly, banging started on the bathroom door. I burst into tears. This was not just knocking. They were smashing that door like it was going to fall down. This entire person's weight was being thrown into it. I dialed 911. Right when I hit send, the banging stopped and I hung up. I really didn't know if my family was just playing a trick on me, The last thing I wanted to do was have the cops come. I was already a troubled kid, so I might get in even more trouble. I stayed there in the bathroom, sitting in the corner wrapped in a towel for over 30 minutes before I heard my family's minivan pull up into the driveway. At that moment, I started crying even more. I knew that whoever was just in my house was not a member of my family. My mom called out my name, and I responded by telling them I was upstairs. I was not leaving this room until I knew I was safe. I told her what had happened, and she didn't believe me at first. The door was still locked when they got home, so how could someone have just gotten in? It turned out she had left her phone at home on the counter by accident, so when I told her to get it, she went to right where she'd left it. There it was, sitting right on the counter. No incoming call in the phone's memory either. I showed her my phone though, which clearly still had the outgoing call on it. This didn't add up. For a while, she thought I must have had some sort of mental break that night, or hallucinated everything. To ease my mind though, we added a chain lock to every door in the house. For 5 years, nothing extreme like that ever happened again. Life did get pretty busy though. I got involved in activities that made sure I was never home alone again. I joined sports in every season, volunteered, anything and everything I could do. Every month or so though, I would hear these distinct footsteps on the porch below me. I lived on the second floor in the bedroom on the far left side directly over the front porch, so I could hear everything, even my dog sighing. It would always be someone like pacing back and forth. Then my dog would start barking and immediately the steps would stop. It got so bad one night when I was 15. I woke up myself and the twins. We all met in the hall, fully prepared to go down and attack whoever was on our porch. My brother equipped with his baseball bat. Once we got downstairs though, it stopped. It wasn't until this last summer, just as I'd turned 18 and finished my first year of college, that the scariest moment happened to me. It was a weekend night, and my parents had gotten accustomed to going out of town pretty much twice a month, leaving me, my brother, and my sister home alone. They took my other brother, who was only 9. This night, the twins were going to a party in the neighboring town, though, and would not be coming home until the next day. I saw this as the perfect time to camp out downstairs in the living room, make a bunch of food, watch a bunch of movies, and get high. I FaceTimed my boyfriend. Somewhere into the call, though, he said something that kind of creeped me out. I really didn't think much of it at first since I was so high, but he called out to me and asked, "You're home alone, right?" I was confused and laughed. Of course I was. Why? He shook it off, saying he thought he'd seen something in the porchway behind me, but he wasn't really sure what it was. I got up right away and walked to the laundry room. I made sure the door was closed, I double-checked all the locks, I passed down at around 1 a.m., TV on and all. All of a sudden though, I woke up to a loud banging around 3. Immediately, I was pierced with fear. It was the same loud body-slamming banging from years ago, a memory I had blocked. It started at the side door directly to my right. I couldn't move my body. I was too scared. I looked over and saw a light flashing inside, like someone was shaking a flashlight into the door. Then the same noise started at the front door, and again at the side door. All 3 doors to my house were lit up, banging so hard the entire house was shaking. Then I heard it on the front porch, like a knife or something sharp being dragged along the door. I was bawling my eyes out. I dialed 911 and started frantically explaining what was going on between my sobs. The person on the phone told me to scream out I was calling the cops, and if needed, he would send someone over. I did, and right away the house went still. Then I could hear someone laughing from all the doors, multiple different voices. This automatically made me think someone must be playing a prank on me. My friends and siblings had been known to try and scare each other. I told the man that everything seemed fine. I thought my siblings might just be playing a prank on me. I laid there and called my brother. When he answered though, I could tell right away it was not him. I could hear the party in the background, which horrified me. I told him what had happened. The twins caught an Uber and immediately came back. We spent the rest of the night texting our friends, trying to figure out who it could have been, but nothing. Almost all our friends were accounted for at that party, nearly 20 miles away, so it couldn't have been any of them. We all slept on the couch with no more occurrences that night. It's been about 5 months since then, and I've since gone back to school. I've only come home once between then and now, and currently I'm home on winter break. Nothing else odd has happened, as I've tried not to stay home alone. Last night, though, I was awake for no reason other than scrolling around on Reddit when around 2 a.m. I heard someone pacing back and forth on the porch. I texted my brother, and he confirmed that he heard it too. This happened to me in 2008 in Las Vegas. I was living with my husband and our son, who was about 2 years old at the time. I would frequently take our son to the grocery store early in the evening with me to do some shopping and give my husband some alone time. I never really worried much. The store was literally just outside my neighborhood, plus we lived in a very nice area. I finished up my shopping and put my son in his car seat. By the time I'd finished loading the car, he was passed out. I decided to quickly fill my tank at the gas station on the other side of the lot. While I was pumping gas though, a big truck pulled up on the opposite side of my pump. The man pumped his gas and seemed to take no notice of me. Then he left. Just as I was finishing up though, his truck suddenly pulled up next to my car once again. The man inside, who looked like he loved his meth, said, "Excuse me, miss, but I just felt compelled to tell you how beautiful you are. As a matter of fact, the only reason I came to get gas here, it's because I saw you come here from the grocery store, and I just had to be nearer to you. I've been trying to find the courage to approach you for a while, actually." I was flattered and thanked him for the compliment, but quickly informed him I was off the market. I know, it was worth a shot though. He began to pull off. Suddenly he backed up again though, and said, "If you tell your husband what I said, I'll kill him." Then he drove off. Needless to say, this freaked me out, so immediately I called my husband. He told me not to come directly home, in case the guy followed me. I drove around a bit until I felt I'd lost him, and then I went home. My husband and I went over it over and over again. How could the man possibly kill my husband if he didn't know him or even where we lived? Then, some of the things he said started to ring in my head. How he'd been watching me at the grocery store. I started to think that maybe he hadn't just meant that night. How long? How many days had he been watching me there? When I told him I was married, he said he knew. Is it possible he had followed me home on previous occasions even? We put extra locks on the doors and took extra precautions. We tried to forget about it. He was probably just some crazy guy, right? Well, about a week later, around 8 or 9 p.m., my husband decided to run up to the gas station to get some cigarettes. I was sitting on the computer in our dining room as he left through the garage door. Our son was sleeping in his bedroom on the other side of the house. About a minute after he had left, though, suddenly I heard the garage door into the laundry room open and somebody coming inside. Immediately, I assumed my husband must be grabbing something he'd forgotten. I called out to him and didn't get a response, so I called his name again. I received no answer, but I could hear someone moving around in the laundry room. I started to get worried. All the guns in the house were in our room. I would have to walk right past the laundry room to get to them. Suddenly, I heard my 2 pit bulls in my room start growling. Both dogs started barking viciously and ran toward the laundry room door, at which point I heard the laundry room door to the garage open and slam shut very quickly. At that point, I grabbed my phone. I ran into my son's room and called my husband to ask if he had just returned home for something. To my horror, he was still at the gas station. I told him someone was in the house, but I thought the dogs had scared them out. He instructed me to stay in our son's bedroom with the door closed. He was on his way home, so I sat there in the dark next to my sleeping son in sheer terror. 2 minutes later, I heard the dogs barking again and someone barging into the house through the garage door. After what felt like forever, my husband came into our son's bedroom. He checked the whole house and all around our property, but couldn't find anybody. We came to the conclusion that the stalker from the gas station must have finally taken his opportunity to catch me alone. Based on what that creepy tweaker had said to me, Who else could it have been? What really freaked me out though is not knowing how long he had been watching me before that. How long had he been watching me before he approached me at the gas station and before he barged into our home? It really opened my eyes that someone could stalk you without you ever knowing about it until it's too late to do anything. I firmly believe my 2 pit bulls saved my life, my son's life, and possibly my husband's too that night. That had my husband not let the dogs into the house before he left, I wouldn't be here right now, nor would my son. To this day, anytime I have to be home alone, or my new husband and I are sleeping, I have to have my pit bull beside me to watch over me. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.